The night was silent on the edge of the human research outpost. A thin layer of dust from the alien desert floated in the air, glowing faintly under the two pale moons. Dr. Lena Carr was working late in the lab, her eyes focused on a glowing screen full of data about local plant life. She was the only human awake at this hour. The sound came suddenly, a deep, rapid knocking on the metal door. It was not the calm press of a door chime. It was desperate. Lena froze. Visitors were rare, especially at night. Most of the alien refugees in the nearby colony stayed within their own shelters after sunset. The desert winds could be dangerous, and wild animals sometimes roamed. The knocking came again, louder. Then she heard something else, a strange, high-pitched cry, thin and trembling like a kitten in pain. She quickly put on her breathing mask and walked to the door. The air outside was safe enough for short times, but the dust often irritated human lungs. She pressed the control panel, and the heavy door slid open with a hiss. A figure stood there, hunched and trembling. It was an alien woman, tall and thin, her skin a soft blue-gray with faint silver lines running down her neck and arms. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and in her arms, wrapped in a faded blanket, was something very small. The alien's large, black eyes met Lena's. Her voice shook as she spoke in broken human standard. "Please, help. My baby, my milk, is gone." Lena stepped back in shock. She had met this species before, the Vareth, gentle people who had fled here after their homeworld was struck by asteroids. The baby in the woman's arms was tiny, with fragile limbs and skin so thin that faint blue veins could be seen beneath. The small creature let out a weak cry, almost too soft to hear. Lena's heart tightened. "Come in, quickly," she said. She guided the woman inside, closing the door against the cold night wind. The alien stumbled to a chair. Her breathing was uneven, as if she had been running. Lena fetched a clean cloth and some water. The woman shook her head at the water but pointed instead at the baby, her eyes wet with tears. Lena knelt to look closer. "What happened?" The woman struggled for words. "My mate, gone. Dead. Asteroid strike. I have no more milk. He will die soon." Her voice broke on the last word. Lena felt a rush of sympathy. She had read the Vareth medical files. Their young were extremely dependent on a special nutrient in the mother's milk for the first cycles of life. Without it, they became weak and could not survive. She took out her small medical scanner and gently passed it over the baby. The readings appeared on her wrist display: low body temperature, dehydration, severe nutrient deficiency. The tiny heart was beating too slowly. "How long?" Lena asked softly. 2 days. No milk," the woman whispered. "No formula. No other mothers nearby. They all gone." Lena knew the truth. The asteroid strike last month had wiped out much of the nearby Vareth settlement. Supply ships from the Central Federation were delayed because of the war in another sector. Even if help was called now, it would not arrive in time. The baby gave another faint cry, weaker than before. Lena's mind raced. She could try to mix a replacement from human food stock, but the Vareth nutrient was unique. It wasn't just about calories. It contained microscopic compounds that shaped the baby's immune system and nervous growth, and there were regulations. The Interstellar Health Code strictly forbade cross-species biological substitutes without formal approval. In the past, some well-meaning attempts had caused poisoning or strange mutations. But as she looked at the baby's fragile form and the mother's pleading eyes, Lena felt the rules fade in importance. "What's your name?" Lena asked. "Rilava," the woman answered quietly. "Rilava," Lena said slowly. "I can try, but it's dangerous. I don't have your species' milk. I would need to create something close. If I fail—" Rilava's black eyes shone with desperation. "If you do nothing, he dies. Please." That word, please, carried more weight than any law or warning. Lena nodded once. "Then I'll try." She helped Rilava settle in a small room near the lab, laying the baby in a warmed cradle unit to keep his body temperature steady. Lena gave the mother a thermal blanket and told her to rest, though she knew Rilava would not sleep. Returning to her workbench, Lena began searching through the Vareth biological database. The composition of their milk was complex: proteins, sugars, enzymes, and an entire class of living microorganisms unique to their evolution. She ran her finger over the data lines, thinking fast. She might be able to replicate the basic structure using protein samples stored from earlier research. She had once studied Vareth agriculture, which used similar microorganisms for food fermentation, but even if she could make it, it might not be perfect. And perfection was the only thing that could guarantee the baby's survival. In the quiet of the lab, the only sound was the soft hum of the machines and the faint breathing of the tiny child from the other room. Outside, the alien desert stretched endless under the pale moons, as if holding its breath. Lena leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the blinking cursor of the synthesis program. She knew this was only the beginning. She whispered to herself, 48 hours, maybe less, no mistakes. And with that, she began. The next morning, the desert sky outside the outpost was pale gold. The 2 moons had sunk low, and the wind carried thin waves of dust across the empty ground. Inside, Dr. Lena Carr was already awake, her eyes heavy from a night without sleep. She had spent hours studying the Vareth milk formula. Every time she thought she had a solution, the numbers refused to match. The alien compounds were not just food. They were living, changing elements that worked like medicine for the baby's tiny body. In the small room near the lab, Rilava sat with her child in her arms. She rocked him gently, humming in her own language. The sound was soft, almost like a whispering breeze, but Lena could see the truth. The baby's limbs were thinner than before, and his cries were weaker. Lena brought over a scanner and checked the readings again. The results made her stomach tighten. The nutrient levels had dropped even further. "How is he?" Lena asked quietly. Rilava looked up with tired eyes. "He dreams, but does not wake often. His breath is small." Lena forced a small smile, trying to keep her own fear hidden. "I'm working on it, but I need more information about your milk, details your colony's database might not have." The alien mother nodded. She spoke slowly, describing the feeding cycles, the warmth needed for the milk to flow, the taste, even the smell. Lena typed every word into her terminal. When Rilava finished, she asked in a trembling voice, "Can your kind give milk for my kind?" Lena shook her head gently. "Our milk is too different. It would make him sick. But maybe I can build something close enough." The problem was not just science, it was the law. Lena knew the Interstellar Health Code by heart. She had trained for years in xenobiology, and one of the first rules every student learned was this: no untested biological product can be given to a living alien without Federation approval. The reason was clear. Alien biology was unpredictable. A wrong chemical, a wrong protein, and the patient could die painfully. If the Patrol or Central Command discovered she was attempting this, she could lose her career, her license, and possibly her freedom. But when she looked at Rilava and the small life in her arms, the law seemed far away, like a cold voice from another planet. Lena returned to the lab and began preparing the synthesis chamber. She searched through the outpost storage for anything that might help. She found protein cultures from an old Varith farming experiment, fermentation microbes that had similarities to the ones in Varith milk, a nutrient gel base used for plant seedlings rich in minerals. It was not much, but it was a start. She set the chamber to low temperature and began feeding the base materials into it. On her display, molecular diagrams spun slowly, showing how the alien proteins might connect to human-made compounds. Hours passed. Outside, the desert sun rose high, and the shadows of the outpost stretched long across the dust. From time to time, Lena went to check on Releva. She always found her in the same place, sitting quietly, holding the baby close, murmuring in her own tongue. She refused food for herself, taking only small sips of water. Once, Lena tried to convince her to rest, but Releva shook her head. If I close my eyes too long, he might go away. That answer stayed in Lena's mind as she returned to the lab. The synthesis process was painfully slow. Twice, the mixture collapsed into useless liquid, the proteins breaking apart before they could form the correct chains. Each failure cost precious hours. By late afternoon, Lena had a sample that looked promising, pale blue, slightly thick, with the faint glow common to many Varith biological fluids. She tested it on the scanner. The readings were close, but not exact. The immune microorganisms were missing. Without them, the baby might survive for a few days, but then his body would fail. She tried again. And again. The hours ticked away. Finally, near evening, she leaned back in her chair and rubbed her face with both hands. Her eyes burned from staring at the screen. The truth was clear. She could not build the complete formula from dead samples. She needed living cells from a healthy Varith adult to grow the correct microorganisms. But there were no other Varith in the area. The nearest surviving group was several hundred kilometers away, beyond the dry flats where no transport could pass quickly enough. She stared at the small vial of imperfect formula on the desk. It was the only thing she had, and it was not enough. A soft sound broke her thoughts. Lena turned and saw Releva standing in the doorway, the baby wrapped in a blanket against her chest. "Is it ready?" the alien mother asked. Lena hesitated. "It's not complete. It might help for a short time, but—" "Then give it," Releva said quietly. "Short time is better than no time." Lena looked at the baby's tiny face. The eyelids barely moved. The breathing was shallow, her heart pounded. She knew she should wait, test it more, adjust the balance. But she also knew every hour without nutrients was another step toward the end. She took a slow breath. "Let me try one more adjustment, just one." Releva said nothing, only tightened her hold on the baby and nodded. Lena turned back to the chamber and changed the settings. She replaced part of the protein with a fermented sample from the plant cultures, hoping it might mimic the missing organisms. It was risky. She had no way to predict how the baby's body would react. The machine hummed, and the pale blue fluid began to swirl gently inside the vial. Lena watched every movement, her mind racing with calculations and silent prayers. When the process finished, she held the warm vial in her hand. It was only a small amount, enough for one feeding. She looked at Releva. "This might work, but it might also—" She stopped herself from saying the rest. The alien mother stepped forward, her eyes steady. "I trust you, human." Lena swallowed hard. She knew there was no turning back now. Outside, the wind picked up, dust swirling against the outpost walls, like a storm trying to get in. Inside, Lena prepared the first drop of the unknown formula, knowing that what happened next could change everything. The vial in Lena's hand felt heavier than it should. It was just a small tube of pale blue liquid, but it carried the weight of life and death. She moved carefully, as if even the wrong step could spill its contents. Releva followed her into the small medical room the baby still wrapped tightly in a blanket. His breathing was faint, his tiny mouth opening only slightly with each shallow gasp. Lena placed the vial in a warmer to bring it to body temperature. She spoke softly, almost, to herself. Too cold and it could shock his system. Too warm and the proteins will break. Rilava stood still, watching every movement. Her black eyes did not blink. The warmer beeped softly. The formula was ready. Lena took a sterile dropper and drew up the liquid. She knelt beside the cradle unit where she had placed the baby earlier. "Just a little at first," she said. "We see how his body reacts." She placed a single drop on the baby's lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly his tiny tongue moved, tasting it. Another drop followed, and then another. For a brief moment, Lena felt hope. But after the fourth drop, the baby's body twitched. His eyes opened slightly, unfocused, and then closed again. The monitor beside the cradle beeped, a warning tone. His heart rate was dropping. "No, no, no," Lena whispered. She gently lifted him, checking his airway. Rilava stepped forward, panic in her voice. "What is happening?" "His body is struggling," Lena said quickly. "It's not rejecting the formula, but it's too weak to process it all at once." She laid the baby against her forearm, keeping his head supported, and began tapping lightly along his back to stimulate his breathing. Slowly, his chest rose again, and the warning tone faded. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We go slower," she said firmly. "Every few minutes, one drop. No more." The hours that followed were some of the longest in Lena's life. She stayed in the medical room, feeding the baby in tiny amounts. Between drops, she monitored his vital signs, adjusting the cradle's warmth and humidity to match the conditions of a Vareth mother's arms. Outside the walls, the desert sky shifted from pale gold to deep orange as the sun sank. The wind carried faint howls across the sand, and the outpost's metal frame creaked under the shifting temperatures. By evening, the baby's heart rate had stabilized, still weak, but steady. "It's working," Lena said, almost in disbelief. Rilava's shoulders sagged in relief, but her voice remained cautious. "He lives, but will he grow strong?" "That's the next problem," Lena admitted. "This batch will last one more day. After that, I don't have enough ingredients." She had been thinking about it all afternoon. The proteins she used were nearly gone, and without them, the formula could not be made again. The only way to replenish the supply was to harvest living cells from another Vareth adult. Something impossible here. She checked the supply inventory one last time, but the result was the same. Nothing left that could perfectly match. Her eyes drifted to the communications console. She could send a request for help to the central colony, but it would take days for anyone to arrive. And by then, the baby might not survive. She turned back to Rilava. "If there is anyone at all and within 100 kilometers who could help, we need to know now." Rilava shook her head slowly. "No one. The flats are empty. Only wind and stones." Lena's jaw tightened. Waiting for rescue was not an option. Her thoughts turned to a dangerous idea she had pushed aside before, using human-compatible yeast to create the missing compounds. It had been tested years ago for cross-species aid, but the project was abandoned after unstable results. If she tried it now, the risk was enormous, but so was doing nothing. She returned to the lab and began preparing a new culture. The yeast would need time to grow and absorb the modified genetic patterns. That meant at least 12 hours before it could be tested. 12 hours they might not have. By midnight, the baby was asleep, his small chest moving slowly, but with more strength than before. Rilava sat nearby, not taking her eyes off him. Lena sat in the lab, watching the culture chamber glow faintly, in the dark. She had set an alarm to wake her every hour so she could feed the baby another drop from the original batch. The night passed in fragments of work and worry. At dawn, the chamber beeped. The yeast culture had reached the first growth stage. Lena quickly began processing it into a test sample. The liquid it produced was not pale blue like Vareth milk. It was a faint silver, with tiny shimmering particles inside. It was beautiful in a strange way, and also terrifying. She had no idea if it was safe. She carried the vial to the medical room. Releva looked up immediately. "This is new?" "Yes," Lena said. "It could give him the strength he needs, or it could hurt him." Relava's eyes did not waver. "We must try. Every hour, he grows weaker." Lena hesitated for only a moment. Then she took a single drop from the silver vial and placed it on the baby's lips. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the baby's fingers twitched. His mouth moved more strongly as if asking for more. The monitor beeped. This time, not a warning, but a slight increase in heart rate. Lena's pulse quickened. She gave him another drop, then waited. The improvement held. "It's working," she whispered. Relava let out a sound that was almost a sob. "You are saving him." Lena didn't answer. She knew it was still too soon to celebrate. The baby's body might react badly later, and she still didn't know how long the yeast-based formula could sustain him. But for now, they had bought more time, and in the back of her mind, Lena knew that time was the only currency they had left, and it was running out faster than ever. The desert outside the outpost had grown colder. The moons hung high in the sky, casting silver shadows across the sand. Inside, Lena Carr was exhausted, but she could not rest. The baby's fragile life depended on her. Relava sat nearby, holding her child close, her arms shaking slightly as she whispered soft words in her alien tongue. The small life in her arms stirred faintly, and Lena could see that the yeast-based formula had helped, but it was not enough. Lena wiped the sweat from her brow and returned to the lab. She needed something stronger, something that could truly replace the missing nutrients in Vareth milk. And there was only one solution she had not tried: the human-based nutrient synthesis system she had worked on years ago before it was abandoned. It had been tested on plants and simple animals, not on Vareth infants. But if it worked, it could produce enough nutrients to keep the baby alive. She pulled up the old files. The system used a combination of microbial cultures, modified to produce essential compounds. The challenge was combining them with alien proteins without causing contamination. The risk was high. One wrong calculation could make the baby sicker instead of stronger. She turned back to Releva. "I need to try something new. It's risky, but it might give him the strength he needs." The alien mother's black eyes met hers. There was no hesitation, only trust. "Do it. I believe in you." Lena set to work. She moved fast, connecting tubes and adjusting valves, pouring her knowledge into the machines like a river of careful attention. The hum of the equipment filled the lab, mixing with the faint cries and whimpers of the baby. Hours passed. Lena adjusted temperatures, checked chemical balances, and recalibrated nutrient cycles. Every time a reading was slightly off, she stopped, corrected it, and restarted. Outside, the desert wind howled, but inside, the lab felt like a different world, a place where only science and hope existed. At one point, Lena paused to check on Relava and the baby. The infant's chest rose weakly with each breath, but his skin was warmer than before, and his tiny fingers moved slightly. Lena allowed herself a small smile. Progress, she thought, step by step. Back at the machines, she prepared the first batch of the human-alien hybrid nutrient. It glimmered softly, a pale silver liquid with tiny floating microorganisms. She held her breath. "This has to work," she whispered. Rilava leaned close. "I trust you, human. I have no other hope." The first feeding began carefully. Lena placed tiny drops on the baby's lips, watching every reaction. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his lips moved, his tiny tongue seeking the liquid. His chest rose a little faster. The monitor beeped, heart rate slightly higher. Lena's pulse quickened. She gave him another drop, another. Each one seemed to strengthen him a little more. But just as hope grew, the monitor beeped sharply. The baby's oxygen levels dropped. Lena's hands moved instinctively, lifting him and adjusting his position. She slowed the feeding, giving him a moment to recover. Rilava held her breath. "Is he dying?" "No," Lena said firmly, though her heart pounded. "He is struggling, but he is not dying. We just need to go slowly." The next hour passed like a storm. Lena fed, monitored, adjusted. Every movement, every drop had to be perfect. Finally, the baby's breathing steadied. His chest rose and fell with strength he had not shown in days. Lena let out a breath she had been holding for hours. Rilava's eyes shone with relief, but she did not speak. She simply touched Lena's hand briefly, a silent thank you. Then came the next challenge. A faint hum grew louder outside the lab. The patrol ship that supplied the outpost was landing. Lena froze. The officers had strict rules. If they discovered her work, they could shut her down, quarantine the baby, or worse. She looked at Rilava, then back at the equipment. There was no time to hide the machines. The feeding had to continue. She took a deep breath. Whatever happened, she would not stop helping this child. The patrol officers entered the lab. They were cautious at first, noting the machines and the strange liquid. Lena stepped forward, keeping the baby covered in her arms. "Everything is under control," she said firmly. "The child is alive. I am monitoring him." One officer stepped closer, eyeing the lab equipment. "Dr. Carr, this procedure, it is not authorized. You know the regulations." Lena met his gaze. "I know. But if I had waited for approval, this baby would be dead. I had no other choice." The officer hesitated. He glanced at the baby, now moving more strongly, his tiny fingers curling around the blanket. He looked at Rilava, whose eyes held silent pleading. After a long moment, the officer nodded slowly. "Understood. But document everything. Central Command will want a full report." Relief flooded Lena. She nodded and returned to her work. The baby was feeding again, stronger than before, and the hybrid nutrient system hummed quietly, producing enough for the next day. Rilava's voice was soft but steady. "You saved him. I do not have words. Only thanks." Lena shook her head. "No thanks needed. It is not just me. It is all humans who care. We can help each other across worlds." The baby stirred, lifting his tiny head slightly. Lena smiled. For the first time in days, she felt hope. Real hope. Outside, the desert wind continued to blow, but inside the outpost, a small life was safe. Lena knew the path ahead would be difficult. More nutrients would be needed, more careful monitoring, and every hour counted. But for now, they had survived the first battle. And in the quiet of the lab, under the soft glow of the machines, Lena realized something important. Sometimes humanity's greatest strength was courage and compassion, even in the face of impossible rules. She watched Rilava cradle her child, a quiet smile spreading across the alien mother's face. And Lena knew. This was only the beginning. The morning light spilled through the outpost windows, casting soft golden lines across the lab. The desert outside was calm, almost peaceful, but inside, tension still filled the air. The baby lay in Rilava's arms, small and fragile, but there was a difference now. His chest rose steadily with each breath. His tiny fingers curled and relaxed, and his eyes, though still weak, followed movement. Lena had never felt relief like this. She had been running on adrenaline, fear, and hope for days, and finally, there was a sign that her work might be working. "Look at him," Rileva whispered softly, her voice trembling. "He moves. He is alive." Lena nodded, a faint smile crossing her tired face. "Yes, he's alive. But we need to keep going carefully, one feeding at a time." The hybrid nutrient formula still had limits. It was stable for only a few hours, and each feeding had to be tiny, precise, and controlled. Lena prepared the first drop, warming it to the perfect temperature. She knelt beside the baby, who looked up at her with barely open eyes, trusting in the hands of a human who had become their lifeline. Slowly, she placed a single drop on his lips. His tiny tongue moved and he swallowed it. Another drop followed. She waited. Another. Each small movement was like a battle won. Rilava's hands shook as she watched. "Is it safe?" she asked, though the hope in her eyes made her voice soft. Lena checked the monitor. The baby's heart rate was steady, his oxygen levels normal. "So far, so good," she said carefully. "But we go slowly. We cannot rush." Hours passed. Lena, Rileva, and the baby formed a small, quiet rhythm. Every feeding brought strength, every tiny swallow a victory. Outside, the desert sun climbed higher, and the wind shifted, moving faint dust across the outpost. Inside, the lab felt like a sanctuary. By mid-afternoon, the baby stirred more. He lifted his head slightly, and his lips moved as if searching for more. Lena's heart raced. She had been terrified that he might be too weak to respond, that even her careful hands might not be enough, but now he was showing signs of life that had seemed impossible just a day ago. Rilava's eyes shone with tears. "He is stronger," she whispered. "I can feel it." But just as the hope grew, a sudden noise came from outside the lab. The outpost's main entrance opened with a heavy hiss, and voices echoed through the hall. Lena's heart sank. It was the patrol officers again. She had forgotten. They were scheduled for a routine inspection. She looked at Rileva, who instinctively held the baby closer, as if shielding him. Lena placed a hand gently on Rilava's shoulder. "Stay calm. We can explain. Just keep him safe." The officers entered, their eyes scanning the lab. They noticed the equipment, the small vials of silver liquid, and the gentle hum of machines. Lena stepped forward. "This is Dr. Carr," she said. "We are conducting emergency care for a Varith infant. His mother and I have been monitoring him closely. He is alive and stable." One officer frowned. "Dr. Carr, this procedure, it is not authorized. You know the regulations. Cross-species biological treatments are restricted." Lena took a deep breath. "I know the rules, but if I had waited for approval, this child would have died. There was no other option." The officer's eyes softened as they fell on the baby. The tiny creature lifted his head slightly, and his weak cry reached their ears. For the first time, the officer saw not a test subject, but a living, breathing child. After a long moment, the officer nodded. "Document everything," he said finally. "We will need a full report. But I see why you acted. Do not stop caring for him." Relief washed over Lena. She turned back to the baby. "We're safe for now. Keep feeding slowly," she instructed. Rilava's lips trembled, but she smiled faintly. "Thank you. Human. You saved him." Lena shook her head. "No, it's not just me. It's humans caring for others. That is what matters. We can make a difference. The baby stirred again, opening, his eyes wider, blinking at Lena and Releva. For the first time, he seemed aware of the world around him, tiny fingers moving to explore the warmth of his mother's arms. Even as hope filled the room, Lena knew the danger was not over. The formula had limits, and they had only a small supply left. She would have to produce more, carefully, every day. The yeast-based hybrid was strong enough for now, but sustaining life required continuous monitoring. She worked silently, preparing the next batch. Releva helped where she could, holding the baby close, ensuring every feeding was slow and steady. Each drop was a triumph, each swallow a step closer to recovery. By evening, the baby's breathing was steady, and he had lifted his head on his own several times. Releva laughed softly, a sound Lena had not heard since the first day. It was full of relief, wonder, and gratitude. "You did this," Releva said, brushing a tear from her face. "He is alive because of you." "No," Lena said softly. "We did this, all of us, together. You never gave up on him. I only guided the process. The courage to survive comes from within." Outside, the desert wind continued to blow, carrying dust across the sand. But inside the lab, life had won a small battle. One fragile infant had survived against impossible odds, and two worlds, human and Vareth, were connected by hope, trust, and compassion. As night fell, Lena prepared the last feeding for the day. The baby slept soundly in Rileva's arms, a small hand brushing Lena's as she passed the nutrient dropper. For the first time in days, Lena allowed herself to feel relief. They had survived the day. And tomorrow, with careful care and constant attention, they might survive another. Hope, she realized, was not a law or a rule. It was action, and today, action had saved a life. The desert outside the outpost was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of twin moons. Inside, the lab was alive with a sense of calm triumph. The baby lay in Rileva's arms, his tiny chest rising steadily with each breath. His eyes, once weak and barely open, now blinked with awareness. Lena watched them closely, a mixture of exhaustion and relief washing over her. After days of careful feeding, monitoring, and experimenting, the baby had finally stabilized. He still needed care, but he had survived the most dangerous part. Releva looked down at her child, her black eyes shining with gratitude. "He is stronger," she whispered. "Stronger than I thought possible." Lena smiled faintly. "It is because of you, too. You never gave up on him. That courage is what kept him alive." The outpost doors hissed open again. The patrol officers had returned, and this time they were accompanied by a communication team from the Federation. Lena felt her stomach tighten. She had done everything in secret. Now they would see the full extent of her work. The hybrid, nutrient formula, the machines, the hours of testing. Releva stepped forward, holding the baby carefully. Her voice was steady, carrying across the quiet lab. "These humans, they saved my child. They risked everything. I have no words for the gratitude I feel, but this must be known. Lives can be saved if we trust each other." The officers exchanged glances. One of them spoke first. "Dr. Carr, your methods, they are unapproved, but the results speak for themselves. The infant is alive, stable, and improving. Explain exactly what was done." Lena nodded and began recounting every detail. The yeast-based hybrid nutrient, the careful monitoring, the gradual feedings, and the precise adjustments she had made to match Vareth biology. She explained the risk, the urgency, and how they had worked together to save the baby's life. Rileva's presence reinforced her words. The mother's trust in Lena, Her insistence that the formula be given and the visible recovery of the infant made it impossible for the officers to dismiss. The lead officer finally nodded. It is clear that extreme circumstances required extraordinary measures. While this would normally be against protocol, it is also clear that your actions saved a life. He turned to the communication team. Transmit the formula and procedure design to the Federation's Medical Relief Network. Alert all outposts with Varith populations. This may save many more lives. Rilava's eyes widened. Many more? She whispered. Yes, the officer said. Your child's survival is not just an isolated case. With this formula, dozens, maybe hundreds of infants can survive where they would have died. Lena exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. The tension that had gripped her body melted a little. She looked at the baby, now sleeping peacefully against Rilava's chest. She had feared she might fail, but now, hope had won. The Federation officers stayed for a few more hours, documenting the process and verifying the baby's condition. Lena answered questions patiently, while Rilava explained details about her species' feeding habits and cultural needs. Together, they built a bridge between human knowledge and alien care. When the officers finally left, Lena and Rilava were alone again. The baby stirred and lifted his small hand toward Lena. She smiled and reached out, letting him grasp her finger. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much meaning: trust, life, and connection. You saved him, Rilava said quietly. You gave him a chance. No, Lena replied softly. We gave him a chance. You never gave up. That made all the difference. Humans can build machines, design formulas, and take risks. But it is trust, compassion, and courage that truly save lives. Rilava nodded, brushing her hand over the baby's tiny head. Perhaps humans and Varith are not so different after all. The night passed slowly. Lena stayed near the baby, monitoring his sleep, adjusting warmth and light, making sure every drop of nutrient was perfect. By morning, he had lifted his head on his own, his eyes following the movement of his mother and Lena. He even gave a tiny gurgling sound, a signal of vitality that filled both women with joy. News soon arrived from the Federation network. Other outposts had received the hybrid nutrient formula and were ready to produce it for the Varith infants under their care. Lena read the messages carefully, seeing reports of babies thriving, mothers reassured, and lives saved. Rilava sat beside her, holding her child, tears of relief in her eyes. You did this for all of us, she said. No, Lena repeated, smiling. We did this together, and now others can do the same. This is how humans survive and thrive, not alone, but by helping each other, and by helping those who cannot. Help themselves. The baby's soft cries grew stronger as he stirred in Rilava's arms. Lena watched them, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Against impossible odds, a small life had survived. And that survival, that hope, had begun to ripple outward, touching others, building a bridge between species. For Lena, this was the ultimate lesson of humanity. Courage, compassion, and intelligence, combined, could overcome rules, distance, and danger. It was not just machines or formulas that saved lives. It was care, attention, and a willingness to act when no one else would. As the sun rose over the desert horizon, Lena looked out through the lab's window. The sand glowed orange, the twin moons fading in the daylight. The outpost was quiet, but life continued inside. The baby's soft gurgles, Rilava's murmured words, and Lena's careful monitoring created a small world of hope, one she knew could spread far beyond these walls. She smiled faintly. Humanity had faced impossible challenges before. And again, in the quiet of a desert outpost, with an alien mother and her child, humanity had proven its greatest strength: the courage to help, the knowledge to act, and the heart to care. For Rilava, her child, and Lena, a bond had been forged that crossed worlds. And for everyone who would benefit from the formula, the message was clear: hope and compassion could survive anywhere, even in the coldest, most distant corners of the galaxy. The baby stirred again, reaching out for Lena's hand. She took it, letting the small fingers curl around hers. And in that simple touch, the story of survival, trust, and humanity's enduring strength was written. A story that would ripple across worlds, saving lives, one small act of courage at a time.